Hey math enthusiast, I'm here to review the notes for section 1.1, which deals with points, lines, and planes, an introduction to the basics of geometry. What we first come across are some undefined terms, which sounds a little strange. Okay, when geometry first began, there had to be certain terms or ideas that were the foundation or building blocks of the entire subject. Okay, these terms don't have a formal definition because they were the beginning. So these basic terms are just essentially agreed upon as to what they are. Our first simply being a point. What you need to know about a point is that it has no dimension. All right, and by that I mean no length, no width, no height. Next thing you need to know about a point is that it's represented by a dot. So for example, these bullet points on the left would be considered points. All right. So you can mark a dot pretty much anywhere you want on your paper, and then you also want to label it, name it. Anytime I'm naming a point, I'm going to use a capital letter. So here's a couple points just spread out. Next undefined term that we come across, a line. So what you need to know about this is that it is one-dimensional. All right, so in this case, it has some length, okay? And it also continues on forever. So to represent that, I'm going to have kind of like this straight segment with arrowheads on either end. Those arrows tell me that it continues to go in that direction forever. Okay, typically you'll see some points on your line as well. We'll use some other names since I already used A, B, and C. And as far as naming it goes, okay, so as I said, for a point, you want to make sure you have a capital letter. So like up above, we had points A, B, and C. So now what I've drawn down here is line DE. So when I name that, I'm going to use the 2 points that are on it, D and E, and I'm going to put this symbol up above. Okay, it's kind of like a mini line. Notice it has arrowheads on either end. Now you could also switch it up. You could call it ED with that little symbol up top with the double arrowhead. If you don't like writing out the symbol, you could just call it line DE. My third undefined term, a plane. So we're going from no dimension, one dimension. A plane has 2 dimensions. Now, similar to a line, instead of saying it continues forever, I'm going to say it extends forever or continuously. All right, to represent that, typically you'll see a plane drawn like this. It's kind of like a parallelogram or a slanted rectangle, you might say. Okay, it does have some border, but remember that it extends forever. So technically I've drawn a border around it, but it keeps going, all right, similar to the line. In addition, there should be some points on it. Okay, we use D and E, so we'll pick up where we left off. We'll say F, G, H, maybe there's another point, J or something. Now, the next thing is naming this. All right. You can just use the word plane followed by any three points that are on my plane. So we can use F, J, and H if you want. Or we could call it plane F, H, G. All right, as long as you're picking out any 3 points that are on the plane. Now, another way to name it, for certain planes, you might see a capital bold letter in the corner. So let's say up top there's a bold X in the corner. Now, it is capital, but there's not going to be a dot around it to tell me that it's a point. It's just going to be a letter on its own. That could be an alternative name for the plane. So in this case, I could call it just plain X if I want to make it simple. So let's try to figure out some more about these undefined terms. First question, how many points determine a line? Well, if you remember how we named our lines, so this is what we had on the previous slide. So we have line AB, and those points made up the name of the line. Okay, so in this case, it's going to take 2 points to determine my line. Okay, if I only had 1 point floating out in space, let's say I have point C down here, there's multiple different lines that I could draw going through that point. Okay, but as soon as I add 2 points in my space, so let's say we have C here and D here, now there's only one line I can draw that's going to connect those two. So that's why 2 points determine that line. So obviously I need 2, but how many does that line actually contain? Well, for this example up above, I could add a point here, say C, I could add a point here, we'll say D, I could add a point here, E. I could continue to add points as much as I want. So in this case, for any line, it contains an infinite number of points. So what about a plane then? So if you remember our plane, what we drew on the last slide, okay, when I name it, I'm going to need 3 points to name it. So maybe as we had before, like F, G, and H. Those 3 points determine that plane, where that plane is in space. As far as how many points does that plane contain, well, I could add more if I want. I could add as many as I want. So similar to a line, a plane contains an infinite number of points. The next couple examples have me sketching out a couple pictures. So for the first one, I want to draw 2 lines that intersect. So let's say here's my one line, use the same one from up above, AB, my 2 points on it, and another line intersecting it. We'll call that one CD. And what they want to know is their intersection is what? So where they touch, what should I mark it as? Well, in this case, it's only a point. For the next one, now I'm dealing with a line and a plane that intersect. For this one, the first piece I'm going to draw is my plane. So here's my plane. I'm going to put a bold capital letter in the corner for the name. So this is clearly plane A. And now I want to show that a line is indeed intersecting it. So let's say here's my line. Now, there's a little bit of an issue here because is it actually going through the plane? I really want to see it intersecting at a specific spot. Okay, imagine like you're poking a straw into your fountain soda. All right, it has to go through that specific opening. Okay, so let's say I'm poking through right at that spot. All right, well, the problem is I want to show that this line has now gone behind the plane. So in order to show that it's behind it, I'm going to use a dashed line. So it's going to go through at one specific point. So the next thing I want to do is actually name that point. So it goes through at point B. So let's say this is like line BC. Okay. Now the other thing I want to mention is sometimes you'll see lines named a different way. So as I said, we could call this BC. I could call this obviously CB. I could use the word line if I want to name it like that. All right, but sometimes at the end of your line on either side, you might see like a little lowercase cursive letter, maybe like an L or an M. Okay, that's another name you could give this line. So in this case, it would be like line L or line M, whichever letter is at the end of your line. Okay, but to go back to my actual question, the intersection of a line and a plane is going to be one specific point. Now this third one we have at the bottom is probably the hardest. I have two planes that intersect. So in this case, I've just added a picture to make it a little bit easier to see. So we kind of have a light green plane that is kind of vertical here. All right, and then this dark green plane that is, I guess, kind of horizontal, you could say. So the two planes come together and they intersect right here, essentially in the middle of each of these planes. All right. Now remember, essentially they extend without end. So these rectangles or parallelograms are essentially just representations of part of the plane. All right, but clearly where they come together, it's way more than a point. All right, but it's not a whole plane that I've highlighted here. It's a line. Okay, two planes are always going to intersect in a line. And we'll also see that in the next example. So in this picture on the right, in this first example, you can clearly see that we have two planes that intersect. So you kind of have this vertical gray plane and then this horizontal white plane that intersects it. Now, the first question is focused on line KL. So let's highlight that in our picture. It's line KL. It has arrowheads on either end because it extends without end. And line PQ. All right, once again, I know these two are lines because of the symbols up above. Okay, so what they want to know is where do these two intersect? Well, I can clearly see where the red and the blue line touch. It's right at this point, and I just want to name that. So if you want to, you can just write J, or if you want to, you can say point J. All right. But if it's just a capital letter all by itself, it's understood that you're referring to a specific point. For number 2, they want the intersection of line PQ. Just highlighted that one. So line PQ. And now I'm dealing with a plane. So line PQ and plane KMN. So let's find these 3 points first. K, M, and N. Now, it looks like M and N are in both the white and gray plane, but K is only in the white plane. So what I'm referring to is the white plane here. So I want to know, where does that red line intersect the white plane? Well, most of this red line is in the gray plane, but it looks like it cuts through my plane right at point J. And once again, I can tell that it cuts through because right back here, you have that dashed line showing that it's on the other side of the plane. So for number 2, my answer is actually the same. You can just say J, or you could say point J. As for number 3, they want the intersection of plane R. Notice now they're only using a single letter. Remember, this is that bold letter here in the corner. So plane R is referring to this white plane. And then we have plane S. So here's my bold S in the corner. That's referring to the gray plane. So I'm trying to figure out essentially where do those two touch. All right, we already said earlier that it looks like point N and point M are on both of those planes. But it also looks like point J is part of that as well. And if you remember what we said before, two planes always intersect in a line. So it's going to be this entire line right here. Now, when I name my line, I only need 2 points to name it. So if you just want to go with MJ, that's fine. Make sure you include your symbol for line as well. If you want to use N and M, that's fine. Just make sure you include your symbol. Or if you don't want to use the symbol, you can just write out the word followed by any 2 points on the line.